You will wake at dawn, having forgotten the name they called you at home, and step onto the cold stones of the great wall, where your fate was written in dusty ledgers long ago and promptly forgotten. Here, on the border of the ancient empire, life is a never ending anticipation of death, and death is not a feat, but just another line on a clay tablet. Here, where everything is built on bones and lies, patrol turns into an endless torment, discipline into absurdity, and the eternity of the wall into a reminder of your own insignificance. Welcome to a world where heroism means simply making it to sundown, and the memory of you will vanish faster than a name scratched into a damp brick. Here, there is no glory, no meaning, only the wall, the boredom, and you. But before you get comfortable, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm always curious to see who's joined us. Now settle in. We're about to begin. You wake to the brittle light of dawn, the color of stale rice water seeping through the cracks in the battered wooden shutters. The barracks smell of old sweat, damp straw, and beneath it all, the faint mineral tang of stone, ancient stone that has seen more lifetimes than any living soul on the wall. Somewhere in the farthest corner, a rat resumes its tireless investigation of a leather boot, indifferent to your existence, just as the empire itself is indifferent to your fate. You envy the rat. No one will ever demand a patrol report from a rat. You sit up, bones popping like poorly made fireworks, and reach for the same battered uniform you wore yesterday and every day before that. The cloth is heavy, stiff with salt from months of your own sweat, but at least it is serviceable. The regulation sash, a faded shade that once might have been red, cinches your tunic with the exacting precision expected from a subject of the first emperor. Each knot is a minor act of rebellion. You never tie them quite as tightly as the instructors in Chang'an demonstrated, and yet, miraculously, you remain alive. Your boots are relics in themselves, thick soles of stitched leather and straw, patched so many times they are a living record of your foot's journey across the endless stones. You slide in a thin bone needle, carved during a windless, sleepless night on watch, so you can mend the inevitable next tear in your clothing. The needle is your true talisman, not the bronze dagger at your belt. With it, you are a tailor, a survivor, a man with the modest ability to hold his world together. The day's rations, too, await you with all the enthusiasm of a condemned man awaiting his sentence. In a battered clay bowl, a few clumps of half-boiled millet, cold and sticky as yesterday's complaints. Beside it, a hard blackened lump of something that might have once been meat, but could just as easily be a scrap of old boot. You contemplate this with the same detached interest you would apply to a dead sparrow. Perhaps it once had wings, perhaps it sang, but those days are long gone. You gather your supplies with the languor of someone who knows that speed is pointless and delay is dangerous. Into your pack go your bowl, your bone needle, a half-finished spool of thread, Your journal, kept for inspection, not for posterity, and a small rock. The rock, smooth and weighty, is for luck. You have considered eating it. One of your comrades claims to have seen a man do just that in the fourth year of the emperor's reign. It did not help. Your hands, calloused and cracked, find the leather strap that holds your spear. The spear is regulation length, just under 2.5 meters, though nobody can agree whether it is intended for fighting men or for keeping wolves at bay. You suspect neither men nor wolves care much for regulations. The bronze tip glints dully, bearing scars of use and disuse in equal measure. Before you leave, you allow yourself the luxury of a single stretch, arms above your head, back arching, joints grinding in protest. In the brief silence that follows, you hear the first mournful note of the morning wind keening across the stones. It is a sound older than your fear, older than the wall itself, a warning and a welcome in the same breath. The sergeant's voice comes rasping from the next room, a sound as reliable as the sun. He recites the morning orders, voice devoid of hope or emphasis. Patrol north, mark tower numbers, report any breaches, return at sunset. The words are as much a part of the stone as the wall itself, and just as impossible to ignore. You step out into the pale light, feeling the crunch of gravel beneath your boots. The sun barely clears the horizon, an anemic coin promising little warmth and less comfort. You sling your pack across your shoulders, settle your helmet, a dented relic from some forgotten skirmish, and begin your march to the first watchtower. Today, like yesterday, you are a silent part of the wall. You are one man among thousands, a body filling the gap between the empire and whatever chaos lies beyond. Your name is known to no one who matters, least of all to the wall. The great wall has swallowed men greater than you and spat out nothing but dust and legend. You begin to walk, the stones cold and uneven beneath your boots, each step echoing through the empty morning. As you walk, you cannot help but wonder how many feet have trodden this same path, how many boots have worn these stones smooth, how many silent complaints have drifted up into the dawn and vanished. You do not expect answers. The wall offers none. The journey has begun. You are tired already. The first watchtower stands ahead, squat and sullen, as if it resents your arrival almost as much as you resent having to walk toward it. Its silhouette, etched against the bleary dawn, looks less like a fortification and more like a warning, a reminder that neither you nor the empire is as grand as the architects intended. You count your steps. You always count your steps. It is one of the few small rebellions left to you. If you do not count, the wall will. The wall, after all, has infinite patience and an even longer memory. As you approach, the wind picks up, carrying with it a sharp tang of old mortar and the ghostly hint of burnt millet from some previous century's half-failed breakfast. The stones here are darker, slick with a cold dew that refuses to evaporate. You catch yourself wondering who first hauled these stones up the ridge. how many broken backs and splintered hands it took to fit each block in place. Official records, when they bother to mention such things, estimate tens of thousands of laborers. You know it was more. It always is. The watchtower itself is a masterpiece of practical discomfort. From a distance, it has the dignity of a tomb. Up close, it is simply a cramped box of stone, the sort of place you could imagine spending an eternity, if only because every moment inside feels like a small slice of forever. The narrow window slits are just wide enough to let in the wind, and just narrow enough to ensure you will never get a decent view of anything but the featureless, endless steppe. You force yourself up the rough steps, your knees complaining at the incline, and duck through the low entrance. Inside, the space is barely large enough for two men and a stack of arrows, if those men have not eaten in several days. Some previous soul has left a crude tally carved into the wall, vertical lines grouped in fives, so many sets that you stop counting after the fourth row. You wonder if the carver finished his tour or if the wall finished him first. The interior is always a little colder than outside, as though the stones themselves hoard each miserable night. In the corner, a broken lantern and a shriveled strip of dried pork rest atop a heap of crumbling scrolls. You turn one over with your boot. Orders from a decade ago. Reinforce the northwestern rampart. It commands in blocky, humorless characters. The rampart was never reinforced. It stands just as it did when you arrived, crumbling, reliable in its unreliability. From the window slit, you peer out at the land. On one side, the empire, a sweep of scraggly trees and tired farmland. On the other, the unknown. You pretend not to care, but every century learns to measure the horizon, to trace the thin line between what is yours to defend and what is not worth defending. You try to convince yourself that these stones matter. The wall, after all, is a monument to conviction. If not your own, then someone's. The official history, which you are required to memorize and recite whenever an officer visits, insists on grandeur. The first emperor, born under the sign of the dragon, unified the lands, crushed the warring states, and ordered the construction of a wall so vast that it could hold back every horse and arrow from the north. You can recite this with your eyes closed. In fact, you often do, to the amusement of the rats. What the official version does not mention are the blisters, the deaths by exhaustion, the endless nights when men argued whether they were building a wall to keep enemies out or to keep themselves in. You run your fingers over the stone, feeling the cold roughness. Each brick, they say, was numbered and recorded. Each laborer was counted, each death tallied, until the records, like the men, vanished into the dust. The history you live is not the history you tell. The stones are indifferent to both versions. Someone, years ago, tried to brighten the space by painting a sun above the entry arch. It is little more than a faded smear now, but you admire the effort. A small, desperate assertion of hope against the endless monotony of guard duty. You suspect the painter was disciplined for wasting pigment. Such is the way of the wall. You open the ledger as required and record your presence. The act is ceremonial, as everything here is. You note the date, the weather, gray, slightly more miserable than usual, and the fact that you are still alive. You do not record your opinion that the watchtower, if it ever served a purpose, has long since forgotten it. In the silence, you become acutely aware of your own heartbeat, the soft scrape of your boots, the way your breath clouds in the narrow window's light. The Empire expects you to be vigilant. You are. You vigilantly watch as another hour dies and is added to the countless hours before it. Eventually, you step outside, the damp wind cutting through your tunic. You look back at the tower, squinting. You are struck by a sudden certainty. Long after you are gone, the wall will remain, its stones absorbing the footsteps and sighs of generations yet unborn. The Empire built the wall to last forever. You are not so convinced about yourself. Your patrol resumes. The next tower is visible in the distance, hunched like a weary ox on the slope. You begin to count your steps once more, because if you do not, the wall will. It is not enough to simply exist on the wall. You must also be accounted for. The Empire has ways of tracking even those it cannot remember. At the next tower, you encounter the ritual of the clay tablets, those humble rectangular slabs that weigh more than any honest man's reputation and last almost as long. You find them stacked on a crude wooden shelf just inside the entry. The shelf lists alarmingly to one side, as if ready to topple under the collective gravity of so many names, dates, and insignificant details. Each tablet is etched with lines of characters, the sentry's name, the date and hour of patrol, the direction of the wind, and a tally of anything deemed suspicious, which is always nothing unless a superior officer is present. You do not know who first invented this system, but you suspect it was someone with an enduring hatred of human nature. Your fingers brush over the topmost tablet, feeling the gritty coldness of the clay. You see the signature of a man you once met, a fellow conscript from the southern provinces. He has not written his name here for almost 2 months. You wonder, with the detached curiosity of the already doomed, whether he has deserted, died, or simply been transferred to a post even further from the sun. The wall swallows men in many ways. You take a blank tablet and the stylus, a blunt reed with its own history of petty thefts and surreptitious sharpening. The act of writing is slow and deliberate. Each stroke matters, or at least it will matter to the officer who inspects the records at some point in the next season. You record your presence, the hour, the weather, still gray, still miserable, and the general absence of anything resembling a threat. You sign your name with the perfunctory scrawl of a man who knows it will be buried beneath a dozen more by tomorrow's dusk. Mistakes on the tablets are not tolerated. There is no such thing as an innocent error in the Empire's ledgers. You remember the story, half legend, half warning, of the 2 sentries who many years ago switched tablets by mistake. Perhaps it was an honest confusion, or perhaps they did it to amuse themselves, to see if anyone would notice. Someone did. The discovery led to a day-long tribunal where the officers debated the intent, the consequences, and finally, the appropriate punishment. In the end, both men were given 100 lashes and assigned to opposite ends of the wall. The tablets remain as mute witnesses, cracked at the edges, but still legible. This, you reflect, is discipline on the wall. It is not glory, nor even efficiency. It is the meticulous cataloging of boredom and error. The discipline you feel is less about order and more about the quiet terror of being remembered for the wrong reason. Every day is a test, but one with no correct answers. You shuffle the tablets back into their precise order. Some of the older ones are warped, stained with rainwater and the fingerprints of countless predecessors. You imagine a future archaeologist, centuries from now, puzzling over these names and dates. He will marvel at the care with which each hour was logged, never knowing that the only thing ever truly guarded was the illusion of control. Discipline extends to every corner of life here. You eat at the appointed hour, regardless of hunger. You clean your gear, regardless of filth. You speak only when spoken to, and never about the things that matter. You learn to suppress not just your complaints, but your ambitions, your hopes, and even your sense of time. The empire expects uniformity. The wall enforces it with a slow, grinding certainty. A bell sounds, distant but clear, marking the change of shift. The next sentry appears at the door, eyes half lidded, his gait as mechanical as your own. You nod to each other. Any more would be excessive, and exchange the barest words required. He signs the ledger, takes the stylus, and sits in your place. The cycle is unbroken, relentless. Outside, the wind has shifted, carrying with it the faintest trace of smoke from a distant cooking fire. You pause, letting the chill settle into your bones, and allow yourself the luxury of a sigh. It is a sound quickly lost among the stones, one more note in the long, dull song of the wall. As you step away from the tower, you look back just long enough to watch the new sentry scratch his name onto a fresh clay tablet. The ritual continues. The empire is satisfied. The wall is unchanged. You walk on, your footsteps measured and inevitable, toward the next station and the next small act of being counted. You spot another figure trudging along the wall's spine, a distant shape hunched against the wind, shoulders set in the universal slouch of the overworked and underappreciated. It is Lee, your companion in tedium, the only person within 100 li who might remember your name on a day when the wind is not howling too loudly. Lee's helmet is set crooked, his face a pale mask of perpetual disappointment, perhaps in himself, but more likely in the world. You have not yet decided if he is a philosopher or simply too lazy to keep his chin up. You close the distance with the resigned efficiency of two men who have performed this exact maneuver more times than there are stones in the wall. No greeting is required, and none is offered. The wall discourages unnecessary talk. Words are just one more thing that can go astray and come back to haunt you in the form of discipline. Lee's eyes flicker over you, taking in the state of your boots, the mud on your tunic, the way your pack sits awkwardly on your shoulder. You return the favor, noting the new patch on his sleeve, the missing button on his cuff, the telltale crease of sleep deprivation under his eyes. You are both mirrors, reflecting the slow decay of men who live too close to stone. Quiet morning, Lee mutters at last, breaking the silence because silence too can become an enemy if left unchecked. His words hang in the air, heavy as the fog creeping along the battlements. You nod, because nodding is safer than agreeing and less risky than contradicting. A shared silence follows, more expressive than conversation. Lee shifts the weight of his spear, the tip scratching a small groove into the mortar beneath your feet. For a moment, you both watch the sky, as if something interesting might fall out of it, perhaps a new order, or better rations, or simply a bird brave enough to challenge the wind. You think it will rain? Lee asks, not because he cares about the answer, but because he is searching for proof that the world can change, even if only in small, miserable ways. You shrug. Maybe. If not today, then tomorrow, or the day after. Your voice is as gray as the sky. You are not in the business of predictions. The wall has a way of making every forecast redundant. Lee laughs, a sound so brief and humorless that it feels like an insult to the very concept of laughter. When was the last time you saw the sun? He asks. You consider this. There was a day, maybe last week, when the clouds broke for a moment. The sun looked like a dirty coin someone had dropped in the mud. This is your closest attempt at poetry. The wall does not reward imagination, but it does not punish it either, not as long as you keep it quiet. Lee sniffs, unimpressed. I have not seen the sun since the first day I arrived. Maybe it is a myth invented by officers to keep us hopeful. You almost reply, but catch yourself. Sarcasm is dangerous here. A careless word can travel along the stones, finding its way to an officer's ear faster than you can outrun it. You keep your opinions to yourself, as you always do. You both resume walking, side by side, matching pace without effort or intent. There's comfort in this symmetry, a small reassurance that you are not entirely alone in your suffering. You wonder sometimes how many thousands of such pairs have marched this stretch of wall, sharing the same empty landscape, the same heavy silences, the same sense of impending irrelevance. Lee coughs. How long you been here? He asks, squinting into the haze as if searching for a sign that time still moves. You have to think. Long enough that I do not remember what my village smells like. Long enough that the only seasons I know are rain and wind. This is not entirely true. You remember your village, but you have learned that nostalgia is a slow poison. Best to pretend otherwise. Lee nods, satisfied. I count days by the number of times I have nearly died of boredom. By my reckoning, It is about 1,000 times now. His smile is thin, a crack in an old stone. You? You consider the question, then decide it is not worth answering. Some numbers are too large, even for men whose only task is to count. Instead, you change the subject. Any news from home? Lee shakes his head. Nothing worth hearing. My brother sent word he has been conscripted too. My mother wishes me well and prays to the ancestors. I suspect the ancestors are as indifferent as the wall. You almost laugh at this, but the sound catches in your throat. It is safer to let it die. The two of you walk on, the conversation running dry as quickly as it began. There is comfort in shared misery, you realize, but not enough to stave off the hunger gnawing in your belly or the ache in your bones. The wall breeds a particular kind of camaraderie, the fellowship of men who know that nothing they do will be remembered, but that their suffering, at least, is communal. You reach the next watchtower. Lee pauses, stares up at the battered stone. This is where I turn back, he says. Orders. You nod. See you at sunset. If not, then tomorrow, or the day after. Lee grins, the closest thing to hope you have seen all day. If the wall does not eat me first. He turns, boots crunching on the stones, and disappears into the fog. You watch him go, wondering if you will see him again. The wall is full of men who simply vanish, leaving behind nothing but a name on a clay tablet and a patch of empty sky. You shoulder your pack and move on, the loneliness settling around you like a second uniform. You walk. The stones shift beneath your feet, as if the wall itself is tired of its burden and would like nothing more than to crumble back into the hillside. The wind has teeth today, gnawing through your tunic and rattling the bronze tip of your spear. Somewhere in the endless distance, a hawk cries, invisible against the unchanging sky. There are stories, of course. The wall collects them, the way it collects dust and broken dreams. Officers like to pretend that every day is a test, that the world beyond the wall is a seething cauldron of chaos, just waiting for a lapse in discipline, a single unlocked gate. You have seen the opposite. Whole weeks when the only things moving across the plains are tumbleweeds, shadows, and the eternal dust. But you are required to recall the stories of attack. So you do. Like a student repeating an old lesson he does not believe. They tell of a day, long before your arrival, when a band of northern horsemen, described in the official records as barbarians, and in the barracks as just men on horses trying to live, descended on the wall. It was spring. The grass beyond the stones was a faded gold, and the air was thick with the promise of rain. The horsemen rode fast, their banners trailing behind them like dirty ribbons. The alarm drum sounded, echoing from tower to tower, carried by runners who looked less like warriors and more like desperate boys trying to outrun bad news. You imagine the chaos, the panic, arrows notched with shaking fingers, fires lit in hastily dug trenches, officers bellowing contradictory orders while soldiers scrambled for their places. The horses never got close. The wall, for all its faults, does what it was built to do. It stands between men and their desires. Most attackers take one look at the stones, the boiling oil, the murder holes, and decide their dreams are not worth dying for. But there are exceptions. They say one horseman, a giant by the measure of frightened men, scaled the outer slope, using a rope and a courage that bordered on stupidity. He made it to the top, only to be knocked down by a thrown stone. The official record is unclear about his fate. Some say he died, others that he crawled away and became a legend among his people. Still others claim he was captured, interrogated, and then quietly released, because even the empire cannot afford to feed prisoners. You ponder these tales, skeptical. For every story of a glorious defense, there are 100 quieter failures. Gates left open, watchmen asleep at their posts, patrols that simply vanish into the mist. No one tells those stories because they do not fit the neat lines of the ledgers, and because the wall itself would rather forget. Still, every so often you see a patch of scorched stone, a broken spear shaft, or the odd skull peering out from beneath a tumble of weeds. The past leaves its mark, even when no one wants to read it. The drums, which are supposed to warn of attack, now serve only to punctuate the monotony. You have stood at your post, beating a rhythm on the old hide stretched across the frame, just to hear something besides your own thoughts. It is a sound that carries, yes, but it carries mostly boredom. Once, an officer caught you drumming out a song you half remembered from childhood. For your insolence, you were made to scrub the latrines with a stick and a handful of grit. The wall does not forgive creativity. There was another attack years ago that has grown in the retelling. They say a storm came up from the north, bringing a wave of raiders with it. The men on duty that night were so terrified they nearly drowned themselves trying to leap into the moat. The reality, as told by those who were actually there, was less dramatic. A few arrows, some shouted threats, and a group of riders who quickly lost an interest when faced with even modest resistance. The next morning, the officers made the survivors recount the story again and again, each time with more details, more heroism, more blood. You suspect they would have preferred a massacre. Heroism is easier to recognize when there are enough bodies to count. Now, as you walk the lonely stretch between towers, you pass the spot where legend insists the biggest battle took place. There is nothing to see but moss and a puddle of stagnant water. You pause just for a moment, imagining the chaos, the smoke, the futile courage. It is difficult to believe that anything of consequence ever happened here. You press on, thinking, on the wall, the only real attack is the slow siege of boredom. The greatest enemy is not the horsemen or the thieves, but the creeping certainty that your life is being spent in defense of a story no one quite believes. Each new recruit is told that vigilance keeps the empire safe. You know better. Vigilance is a story you tell to keep yourself from listening too closely to the silence. You arrive at the next tower. The sentry there nods, eyes red from lack of sleep. You trade a few words, but neither of you mention the old attacks, or the legends, or the official reports. What is the point? The wall is still here, and so are you. That, for now, is the only victory that matters. You keep walking, your boots clapping a steady rhythm against the uneven stones. The wall beneath you is never the same for more than a few paces. Sometimes the bricks are tight and even, almost smooth beneath your feet. A marvel, you suppose, if you were a man who could marvel at anything after so many months. Most of the time, though, the surface is a patchwork. Some bricks are sunken, others jut out like broken teeth. A few are slick with moss that does not care about imperial decrees or the ambitions of dead emperors. You have been told repeatedly that the wall is a feat of engineering, a testament to the unity and genius of the empire. If that is true, you think, then the empire must be a land of confusion and compromise, because the wall cannot decide what it wants to be. In some stretches, the bricks are gray, hard, and nearly seamless, each one marked with a faint stamp that means little to you, but once meant the difference between life and death for some laborer. On other stretches, the stones are rough and mismatched, pried from whatever ruined village lay closest when the orders for more materials arrived. You pause at one section where the bricks have split wide, a jagged line running through the wall like a scar. A previous century, clever or desperate or both, has wedged a handful of willow branches in the gap, perhaps as a joke, perhaps in the vain hope that something might grow there. The wall does not laugh, and the branches are long dead. At regular intervals, you pass drainage holes, clever little tunnels chiseled through the lower courses, designed to channel rainwater away so the wall will not dissolve under its own weight. These, you admit, are impressive. At least, they would be if someone had thought to clean them in the last 10 years. More than once, you have watched rain pool in the walkway, turning the stone to a slick hazard. Once, a sergeant slipped and landed hard, earning a broken wrist and a new respect for imperial construction. There are crenellations, of course, those tooth-like battlements that break the skyline. They look impressive from afar, a sawtooth crown stretching for miles. Up close, you see the mortar crumbling, the bricks patched with mud and straw, and in one memorable case, with a section of an old cooking pot. In theory, the crenellations provide cover from arrows and a clear line of sight for defenders. In practice, they are windbreaks at best, and even then, only when the wind is polite. Between the towers, you find the wall's surface pitted and uneven, the stones sometimes replaced with stamped earth, an ancient trick from the days before the empire learned to make bricks in such terrifying quantities. You once heard a rumor that some sections are held together with a mixture of rice flour and blood. You do not know if it is true, but you know better than to ask. At every tower, the story changes. Some are built from brick, others from stone, a few from rammed earth or whatever the laborers could drag up the hillside before the overseers lost patience. The towers themselves are all slightly different sizes, as though the architects drew their plans from memory and measured with their feet rather than with any instrument. You remember a time early in your service when you tried to find a pattern in the madness. You thought if you could understand the logic of the wall, maybe you could survive it better. You took notes, you measured the height of the parapets, the width of the walkways, the distance between towers. The only pattern you found was chaos. Eventually, you stopped trying. The wall, like the empire, is best endured, not understood. Still, there are moments when the craftsmanship surprises you. A perfectly fitted arch, a staircase that climbs the hill so smoothly you almost forget to curse each step. Sometimes you see little marks carved into the mortar, a child's handprint, a crude flower, a set of tally marks running out after 7 or 8. These are the only signs that men, not machines or gods, built this place. You reach a section where the wall curves sharply, a deliberate bend to follow the ridge of a hill. The view, if you can be bothered to look, is impressive. The land unfurls in waves, brown and green, broken only by the endless repetition of towers and stones. It is a view designed for men with dreams of defense, not for men who must walk it every day. You stare a moment, then move on. The wind is sharper here, and you have no taste for beauty today. At the far end of the curve, you pass a section where the wall is lower, the bricks loose and easy to dislodge. You think, not for the first time, that it would not take much for someone determined to climb over. You wonder if anyone has. You wonder if anyone has ever bothered to report it. You decide you will not be the first. Your fingers trail along the mortar, flaking in places, hard as bone in others. You think of the thousands of hands that shaped these stones, the thousands more who have cursed them, the few who perhaps admired them. You wonder if, long after the empire has forgotten your name, someone will come here and marvel at the confusion, the stubbornness, the ambition of a people who thought they could wall out the world. You do not believe in marvels, but you do believe in the wall. It is imperfect, inconsistent, and inescapable, just like everything else that matters. You keep walking, the stones shifting beneath your feet. You know the wall is supposed to keep dangers at bay, but it is the life behind the stones that wears you down. Each day, your existence is a tapestry woven from gray thread, thread spun from hunger, routine, and a gnawing certainty that nothing will change. The glamour of the Great Wall, spoken of in distant cities, does not reach this far. Instead, it is here, among the splinters and scurrying vermin, that the real cost of vigilance is counted. Your barracks is a low, timbered building wedged against the inner face of the wall, more draught than shelter. The walls ooze a slow, ancient damp. In winter, you sleep in your uniform, wrapped in a coarse blanket that smells faintly of sheep and overwhelmingly of mildew. In summer, you lie awake, sticky and sweating, the air thick with mosquitoes, fattened on the blood of men who who cannot swat fast enough. There are always rumors that the mosquitoes here are larger, more persistent, and angrier than those in any other province. You cannot confirm it, but you suspect the rumors have an element of truth. Privacy is a luxury no one can afford. You sleep shoulder to shoulder with your fellow guards, separated only by the boundaries of exhaustion and the unwritten agreement to ignore each other's snoring, mumbling, and quiet weeping. Every night, someone mutters in their sleep, sometimes in their native dialect, sometimes in curses, sometimes in prayers whispered to ancestors who have long since stopped listening. Sometimes it is you. Lice are your constant companions, as reliable as the changing of the guard. You pick them from your collar and from the seams of your tunic, crushing them with the cold satisfaction of a man who knows there will always be more. Bathing is a ritual performed more for formality than cleanliness. Water is precious, and even when you are allowed to soak in the river below, you emerge dirtier than you began, as though the land itself is determined to remind you of your place. Meals are measured not by satisfaction, but by the absence of hunger pains. Breakfast is thin millet gruel, laced with grit and the faint taste of mold. Lunch is a handful of boiled vegetables, more stem and root than anything green. Meat is a memory, spoken of in jokes and in the boastful tales of men who once served in richer provinces. The cook, a former criminal who now wields his ladle with the authority of an emperor, doles out portions with an eye trained for fairness and revenge in equal measure. If he dislikes you, you eat last. Letters from home arrive rarely, their paper worn and their words faded. You read them in secret by the feeble glow of a dying lantern, then hide them in the cracks of the wall. You know some men cannot read at all. For them, home exists only in stories and the occasional bundle of dried fruit sent by a family already half starved. Discipline governs every moment. There is a correct way to wear your uniform, a correct way to salute, a correct way to stand when the captain passes, and a correct way to apologize when you inevitably get it wrong. There is also a correct way to be punished, though everyone has their own technique for enduring a flogging or standing at attention until your knees threaten mutiny. The older guards have a saying: if you are not being punished, you are only being overlooked. It is meant as comfort, though it rarely feels that way. Entertainment is a dangerous luxury. Card games are forbidden, so naturally, everyone plays them. Dice appear and disappear like magic, and every now and then, a fight breaks out over a debt no one can remember incurring. The loser pays in rations or in bruises, sometimes both. The winner enjoys a fleeting sense of triumph, which is quickly replaced by the suspicion that he will be next. Occasionally there is laughter, dry and brittle like autumn leaves. Most of the time, conversation circles the same handful of topics: the incompetence of officers, the rumored beauty of women in distant towns, the price of rice, and the certainty that someone, somewhere, must have an easier post. Jokes about the wall itself are strictly forbidden but almost unavoidable. You have heard every one of them and told a few yourself. There are moments of kindness, sharp as splinters, a shared piece of sweet potato, a warning before inspection, a silent nod when you need it most. You learn to appreciate these small mercies. They are the only proof you have that somewhere beneath the grime and the discipline, you and your comrades are still men, not merely extensions of the wall. At night, you lie awake and count the breaths of those around you. You listen to the wind dragging itself over the stones, to the distant howl of wolves, to the soft, steady drip of water seeping through the roof. You wonder if tomorrow will be any different. It never is. You close your eyes, and the wall breathes with you. Even in the most disciplined places, there are cracks, little gaps where life seeps through, where the rules loosen their grip just enough for a bit of mischief to survive. The wall is no exception. Behind its facade of order and vigilance, every guard learns, sooner or later, about the secret storehouses and the delicate art of smuggling. It is an open secret. Every man must eat, and every man craves a taste of something forbidden. You discover your first storehouse by accident. The evening wind is cold, and you are searching for a quiet corner to relieve yourself, away from the judgmental eyes of the officers and the less judgmental eyes of your comrades. Behind the remains of a half collapsed shed, you notice a pile of loose stones, artfully arranged. Curious, and with nothing better to do, you kneel and pry one away. The effort nearly cracks your fingernails, but the stone finally yields, revealing a narrow hollow just large enough for a handful of clay jars and a greasy cloth wrapped bundle. The smell hits you before you see what is inside, an unmistakable tang of overripe fruit, of something sweet gone sour, and underneath, the musky staleness of meat past its best intentions. You drag out a jar, wipe away the dust, and turn it in your hands. The lid is sealed with wax. It pops with a satisfying, guilty sound. Inside is wine, red, thick, and probably older than you are. You take a cautious sip. It is terrible. You drink again anyway. There are stories about these hidden stores. Some say they are the legacy of a previous garrison, men who buried their treasures before being reassigned, hoping to return one day. Others claim they are part of a much grander scheme, managed by a shadowy network of cooks, sergeants, and kitchen boys. Most likely, it is simply the inevitable result of too many hungry men with too little to do. The wall's official rules about rations are strict and humorless. Every man receives his share, no more and no less. But the reality is more flexible. Rations disappear, extra food appears. Sometimes whole sacks of grain are replaced with stones, and nobody notices until mealtime. Smuggling is not so much a crime here as it is a tradition, a way for men to assert some control over a life that offers very little. Wine is the most coveted prize, but not the only one. You find strips of dried pork, hard as shoe leather, but still a feast compared to the daily gruel. There is a bundle of withered pears, and, more surprisingly, a packet of spices wrapped in an old letter. Ginger, maybe, or something close to it. You make a mental note to thank whoever thought to hide these things, even as you promise yourself not to get caught. The punishment for smuggling is severe: a public beating, loss of pay, or, in the worst cases, reassignment to the most dangerous outposts. But the risk, everyone agrees, is worth it. You soon realize the storehouse is not as secret as you hoped. The next day, you see a fellow guard, Han, loitering near the same shed, whistling tunelessly. His eyes dart left and right. When he spots you, there is a brief, silent negotiation, a flicker of recognition, a nod, a quick look away. Neither of you says anything. There is no need. Smuggling operates on trust, or at least on mutual silence. Sometimes the officers catch wind of these schemes. They conduct surprise inspections, turn out bedding, shake down the kitchen, and interrogate the cooks. But the men who run the storehouses are clever, and the officers are often too bored or too hungry themselves to care much about minor infractions. There is a saying here: the wall has cracks. So do the rules. If anyone asks, you have never heard it. The best stories are traded in whispers over evening fires. Once, a new recruit managed to smuggle an entire pig into the barracks, dressed in an old uniform. The officers never noticed, perhaps because they did not want to. Another time, a barrel of strong spirits was disguised as vinegar and only discovered when the captain attempted to clean his boots and was overcome by the fumes. You learn the unwritten rules quickly. Never take more than your share. Always leave something for the next man. Never talk about the storehouse when the wind is carrying your words toward the officers' quarters. If you break these rules, you are not just a thief, you are a fool, and no one will cover for you when the inevitable punishment comes. In the rare moments when supplies run thin, when a cart from the nearest village is delayed by floods or bandits, the secret storehouses become lifelines. Arguments erupt, tempers flare, but somehow nobody ever starves. It is, in its own way, the only system on the wall that works as intended. You develop a taste for secrets. The best ones are simple: a hidden jar, a morsel of sweet fruit, a sip of cheap wine on a cold night. These small pleasures do not change your life, but they remind you that you are still alive, still capable of defiance, still something more than just a shadow on the stones. One evening, you replace the stone over the hollow, checking twice to be sure it is secure. As you walk away, you imagine future guards discovering the storehouse, just as you did, and you hope they find comfort in its meager bounty. The wall is built of rules, but it is sustained by small acts of rebellion. Night falls slowly on the wall, as if darkness itself is reluctant to settle in a place so heavy with waiting. You listen to the last bird calls fade into the gray dusk, replaced by the soft hiss of wind through broken mortar and the distant, uneasy chorus of insects. The stones beneath you surrender their heat with a sigh, and the world shrinks to the cramped limits of your barracks, the endless monotony of sleep, or more accurately, the endless monotony of trying to sleep. Sleep here is an art you have not mastered. You chase it the way a thirsty man chases a rain cloud. Sometimes, just as your mind begins to slip away, a distant clang or shouted order jolts you back to the present. Sometimes you are roused not by noise, but by silence, a sudden, impossible hush that reminds you you are being watched by the wall or by something else. You lie on your cot, the straw mat poking through thin fabric, itching your skin in all the places your hands cannot reach. Above, the roof is nothing more than warped planks patched with mud and hope. In heavy rain, water seeps through, tracing patterns on the walls. In dry weather, dust settles on your face, making you cough and curse quietly, careful not to wake the man sleeping a finger's breadth away. You have learned to fear the dark for its ability to conjure memories. On restless nights, faces from your past crawl through your mind. The mother who sent you here with a stone-faced blessing, the friends you left behind in a place that feels more like a rumor than a memory. Sometimes you dream of them. Sometimes you dream of nothing at all, only to wake with a gasp, heart pounding, certain that you have forgotten something crucial. The wall's nights are not empty. There are the creaks and groans of ancient timber, the scuttle of mice bold enough to steal crumbs from your boots. A chill draft sneaks in at ground level, searching out the gaps in your blanket, making you shiver even in midsummer. You pull the blanket tighter, knowing it will not help. Cold is as much a part of the wall as stone or sorrow. Sleep comes in short bursts, 10 minutes here, half an hour there. You never quite descend into rest. It is as if some part of you must remain awake, tuned to the low hum of threat that never fully disappears. You hear every shifting footstep in the corridor, every cough from the bunks, every restless sigh from the man on your left. You try to count your own breaths, hoping that monotony will work its old magic. Instead, you count the cracks in the ceiling, the knots in the wood, the number of times you have lain awake like this. You envy the men who can sleep anywhere, those who drop off the moment they close their eyes, who snore through thunder and inspection alike. Lee, your occasional companion, claims he once slept standing up, leaning on his spear in a rainstorm. The trick, he says, is to let the boredom carry you. You wish you could learn it, but boredom, in your case, only sharpens the discomfort. Sometimes you wander outside, careful not to be seen. The air is sharper beyond the barracks. The moon, when it is visible, is thin and pitiless, casting long shadows that reach across the wall like grasping hands. From the highest point, you can see the black line of the wall stretching away in both directions, broken only by the squat silhouettes of the towers. It is beautiful in the way a graveyard can be beautiful, impressive, quiet, and filled with the restless presence of those who cannot leave. On the worst nights, your mind invents threats. The scrape of metal from the outer gate, the flicker of movement in the towers, the imagined whisper of an enemy slipping through the darkness. You lie there, frozen, until you convince yourself it is nothing. The wall is thick, but your nerves are thin. You remember the stories of men who lost themselves to the night, sentries who wandered off, never to return, or who woke screaming, convinced the stones themselves were alive. The older guards claim madness is the real enemy here, more dangerous than any raider or wolf. Eventually, exhaustion overtakes you. Sleep arrives unannounced, heavy and dreamless. You wake hours later, disoriented, not sure whether you have slept at all. The cycle begins again. Lie down, toss, shiver, listen, dream, wake, repeat. It is a rhythm as old as the wall itself. In the mornings, your bones ache from too many nights on too little rest. Your mind is slow, your eyes gritty. You move through your duties like a ghost, wondering if anyone else notices how hollow you have become. They do, of course. They see it in your posture, your silence, the way you startle at sudden noises. But the wall does not care. It watches you fumble through another day, indifferent to your fatigue. You envy its patience. You wish, not for the first time, that you could sleep as deeply as stone. Dawn on the wall arrives with the same grudging inevitability as the changing of the guard. You rise, not because you are rested, but because routine is a force more powerful than sleep. Somewhere a bell clangs, a dull, metallic sound that stirs the barracks like a stone dropped into stagnant water. Men grumble, stretch, fumble for boots and belts. The wall itself seems to creak in anticipation, as though amused by your efforts to impose order on its ancient indifference. The changing of the guard is a ritual, one of those small ceremonies the empire clings to, like a superstition, believing it can hold chaos at bay through the simple repetition of form. You gather with the others in the shadow of the main tower, each man lined up according to rank, height, and the inscrutable preferences of the sergeant. The line is ragged. Some men stand tall and stiff, others sway, eyes glazed with exhaustion. You fall somewhere in the middle, upright out of habit, more than conviction. The outgoing watch forms a line facing the incoming shift. The faces are familiar, red-eyed, unshaven, stinking faintly of sleep and the night's cold sweat. The captain appears, a figure of authority, resplendent in a uniform only slightly less frayed than your own. His voice, when it comes, is thin but sharp, slicing through the morning fog with practiced precision. He recites the same words he recites every morning, the names of those reporting for duty, the list of expected threats, none, the reminders of discipline and vigilance. It is an incantation designed not to inform, but to remind you that you are part of something larger and, supposedly, more meaningful. You repeat the prescribed responses, "Yes, Captain," with a deadened enthusiasm that fools no one, least of all yourself. The handover itself is comically formal. The outgoing guards present their weapons but for inspection, as if daring the officers to find fault. The incoming guards accept them with solemn nods, as though taking on the burdens of empire itself. Somewhere in the background, the cook yawns extravagantly, scratching at a patch of lice behind his ear. There are rules for everything: the correct way to salute, the correct way to stand at attention, the correct way to look appropriately grim. You have practiced these rituals so many times they have lost all connection to meaning. Still, you perform them. The consequences of skipping even the smallest gesture are swift and memorable: extra duty, a public scolding, a line in the logbook that will haunt you for months. To outsiders, dignitaries on rare visits, or the occasional merchant bringing supplies, the ceremony must appear impressive. An unbroken line of soldiers, disciplined and silent, framed by the rising sun and the ancient stones. It is, for a moment, easy to believe in the importance of your task, to see yourself as a cog in the grand machine of the empire. But then the dignitaries leave. The cook's pot clangs against the stones, and someone farts, ruining the illusion. Reality seeps back in, as persistent as the morning chill. There are always men who take the ceremony seriously, the ones who memorize every line of regulation, who correct your posture with the weary patience of a school teacher. You pity them. They are the first to be disappointed and the last to laugh. The rest of you carry on, knowing that ceremony is armor. It protects you not from the enemy, but from the creeping suspicion that none of this matters. As the guards trade shifts, the old jokes begin. Do not fall asleep this time. Try not to lose any arrows. Wake me if you see anything interesting. I have forgotten what that looks like. The officers pretend not to hear. Some even smirk, as if sharing in the secret that all of this is more theater than necessity. Still, you respect the ritual in your way. There is comfort in repetition, in the knowledge that some things, however pointless, remain unchanged. When you stand at your post, spear in hand, watching the sun rise over a land that is both yours and not yours, you are connected to 1,000 other men who have stood here before you. Most are forgotten, but their ghosts linger in the pattern of your movements, in the scratch of your boots against the stone. When the ceremony ends, the outgoing guards slouch back toward the barracks, already half asleep. The new shift disperses, each man moving to his assigned post. You head to your section of the wall, the morning sun burning weakly at your back, the taste of ceremony still lingering like cheap wine. You wonder how many times this exact ritual has been performed, how many more times it will be performed long after you are gone. The empire survives on ceremony, and the wall endures because men like you endure its ceremonies. In this way, you are both its prisoner and its keeper. You settle into your watch, the echoes of the morning's ritual humming through your bones. Out here, alone on the stones, you almost miss the company of the others. Almost. The sun rises, pale and unimpressed, as you begin another shift, unchanged, unchanging, on a wall built from both stone and stubbornness. After the ritual of the changing guard, the wall settles into its daily silence, broken only by the hollow sound of your footsteps and the distant caw of crows. In these hours, when the monotony presses down and the landscape is as blank as the sky, your thoughts drift, almost against your will, to the old legends. The wall is thick with stories. Some are told by officers to keep men alert. Others are whispered by guards, their voices lowered as if afraid the stones themselves might listen. The oldest tales are the darkest. They speak of the dead, men who were not merely worked to death during the wall's construction, but buried within it. The rumor is so persistent that even the most rational officers refuse to sleep alone in the watchtowers built on foggy nights. It is said that when a laborer collapsed and could not be revived, the overseers saw no reason to waste time hauling the body down the mountainside. Instead, they sealed the corpse within the wall itself, packing it tight with clay and mortar. Some say these men still linger, their bones hidden beneath layers of stone, their sighs rising with the wind. At night, the legends are sharper. The groans and creaks of the wall become voices, soft, pleading, sometimes angry. You have heard the tale of the White Lady, a spirit who appears to lost centuries, her face as pale as moonlight, her hands stained red with clay. They say she weeps for her husband, a laborer buried alive, when the overseer ordered the wall sealed before he could escape. To see her is a bad omen. To speak to her is worse. There are stories of towers cursed with endless drafts, places where no fire burns bright, no sleep comes easy. Men assigned to these towers become thin and nervous, their faces drawn and haunted. When reassigned, they keep to themselves, as if afraid the curse might follow them back to the barracks. No one says the word ghost, but everyone knows what is meant. The legends do not belong only to the wall's builders. Older guards tell of a time when a general, desperate for speed, promised the spirits of the land an offering if the wall could be finished before the winter snows. The workers toiled day and night until one evening a great snake was seen crawling along the battlements, vanishing into the foundation. The next day, the general fell ill and died, and the wall was completed ahead of schedule. Some men carry small charms, pieces of shed snake skin, coins with holes bored through them, in hopes of avoiding the same fate. You tell yourself these are only stories, yet on sleepless nights, when the fire burns low and the wind tugs at the shutters, you find yourself listening for footsteps that are not your own. Sometimes, in the shadows cast by your lantern, you see movement, a fleeting shape, a flicker of white, a face pressed to the window just beyond the edge of light. You know it is only your imagination, a trick played by fatigue and fear, but knowing changes nothing. Sometimes the legends are practical. There is a tale about a soldier who hid a bag of stolen salt within the wall. Years later, when he was promoted and returned to this section, he tried to retrieve it and was killed by a falling stone. The message is clear: greed is punished, even by the wall itself. These stories are favorites of the officers, who repeat them during evening inspections, hoping to scare men straight. Yet for all their horror, the legends serve a purpose. They fill the silence, give shape to the dread that settles over the wall at night. In the absence of news or entertainment, they become a currency, traded between guards to pass the time or earn a measure of respect. The best storytellers are never hungry for company. You find yourself both skeptical and superstitious. You mock the tales in daylight, but carry a charm on a string around your neck, a coin rubbed smooth by nervous fingers. You scoff at the idea of ghosts, but avoid certain towers at dusk, preferring the company of the living, however flawed, to whatever lingers in the dark. Every so often, an officer will order a section of the wall opened up for repairs. When the bricks are pried loose, everyone watches closely. Most of the time, nothing is found but old straw and dry mortar. But there are stories, always stories, about the time a skeleton tumbled out, or a handful of old coins, or a scrap of silk knotted into the mortar. These finds are quietly covered up, the stories growing in the telling, but always the work resumes as if nothing out of the ordinary has happened. The wall is built on layers: stone, earth, memory, rumor. You are only the most recent layer, and you wonder what stories will be told about your time here when you are gone. If you are lucky, it will be said you kept your watch faithfully and did not anger the ghosts. You laugh at yourself, but it is a quiet laugh, one that does not echo. If there is one thing the wall cannot defend you from, it is the weather. You learn this quickly, sometimes painfully, during your first weeks. No matter the season, the elements are your most reliable and inventive enemies. The empire may boast about holding back northern hordes and unruly tribes, but it is utterly helpless in the face of wind, rain, and sun. Today, the sky is a uniform slab of gray, heavy with the threat of rain that never quite arrives. The damp settles into your bones, making every joint creak, every muscle ache. You try to keep moving, but the cold sticks to you like a curse. There is no escaping it. It seeps through your boots, rides up the back of your tunic, lingers in your hair, until you feel as though even your thoughts are shivering. On other days, it is not cold, but heat that torments you. The sun bakes the stones until they are too hot to touch, the air thick and stifling, the horizon blurred by waves of dust. Sweat pools in the small of your back, drips down your temples, makes your hands slippery on your spear. There are rules about keeping your armor on at all times, but even the officers sometimes slip away to a shadowed corner, armor undone, cursing the emperor's wisdom through clenched teeth. Wind is the wall's oldest companion. Sometimes it comes as a gentle breeze, just enough to stir your hair and carry away the smoke from the evening fire. More often, it is a howling thing, scraping across the parapets, slamming shutters, setting every loose board to rattling. You quickly learn to tie down everything you own, to double knot your cloak, to sleep with your head under the blanket. The wind has a habit of stealing things: caps, cups, hope. The worst is the sand. In spring, when the wind turns north and the sky yellows at the edges, a sandstorm can arrive with terrifying speed. You have seen daylight vanish in moments, the world reduced to a churning blur of grit and misery. Breathing is an act of faith, faith that the cloth over your mouth will hold, that you will not choke before the storm passes. Afterward, everything is coated in a fine dust: your skin, your food, your teeth, even your dreams. For days, the taste of sand lingers, an unwanted guest that never leaves. Rain is rare, but never gentle. When it comes, it pours, sheets of water that beat against the stones, soak through the roof, turn the courtyards to mud. The wall is supposed to be impervious, but you know better. There are cracks and seams everywhere, and the rain finds them all. You spend hours with buckets and rags, mopping puddles, wringing out bedding, cursing the wall's vaunted engineering. Once, after a particularly fierce storm, you woke to find a small stream trickling through the barracks, carrying away a boot and half of someone's breakfast. The seasons bring their own miseries. In winter, the snow piles up in drifts against the leeward side, turning the world silent and dangerous. Frostbite is common. You learn to watch for the pale, waxy patches on your fingers and toes, to huddle close to the meager fire at night, to share body heat with men you barely know. In summer, mosquitoes rise from every stagnant puddle, feasting on exposed skin, humming in your ears until you dream of them in your sleep. There is a joke among the older guards: if the wall does not kill you, the weather will. And if the weather spares you, it is only so you can clean up after it. There is truth in it. The weather is impartial, relentless, and utterly uninterested in the needs of men. You come to know the sky as well as you know the wall. You read its moods, its warnings. A certain color at sunset means rain tomorrow. A band of cloud on the horizon means wind by midday. A sudden stillness means trouble, storms, or, worse, an inspection. You become an unwilling student of the elements, your lessons paid for in bruises, chapped lips, and sleepless nights. Sometimes, when the weather is truly terrible, the guards gather together, pressed shoulder to shoulder in the shelter of a tower, sharing body heat and curses. No one talks much, but in these moments there is a rare sense of unity. You are all equal in the face of the wind, the rain, the indifferent sky. You wonder, as you squint into the driving rain or brace against another dust-laden gale, whether the wall's builders ever imagined their grand creation would become little more than a windbreak for desperate men. You suspect they did not care. The wall was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be eternal. You wrap your cloak tighter, duck your head, and trudge on. The weather has not beaten you yet, but it is patient. If the wall is a monument to endurance, then water is its quiet, insidious adversary. You learn early that thirst shapes your days as much as orders or alarms. Water, so ordinary in other places, so abundant in the imagination of distant officials, becomes a daily uncertainty, a slow trial that never quite ends. The wall, in theory, has a system. There are old drawings pinned to the command post wall showing aqueducts and clever channels, rainwater tanks set at precise intervals, all part of an imperial plan that assumes both logic and maintenance. You look at these plans sometimes, the ink faded, the corners curling, and wonder if the man who drew them ever visited this section. You suspect not. In practice, the system is a patchwork of leaky barrels, cracked cisterns, and faith. Most mornings begin with the hunt for water. The officer in charge consults a roster, rotated weekly, to ensure fairness, or perhaps just to spread the blame when the barrels come up short. You take your battered pail and follow the narrow trail down from the wall, past the half collapsed shed and the scraggle of willow trees that mark the edge of the garrison's tiny world. If you are lucky, the stream at the bottom of the slope is running clear, cold, and free of dead frogs. If you are not, you make do with puddles, scooping carefully to avoid the worst of the silt. Clean water is always in short supply. Some men, usually those new to the post, try to boil theirs with a few shriveled leaves, hoping to improve the taste. Others add a splash of sour wine, a gesture of both defiance and self preservation. Once, a clever cook convinced everyone that rainwater collected from the north side of the wall was luckier than the rest. For a week, men scrambled over the stones during every shower, bowls and buckets in hand, only to find that all water tastes the same when your mouth is dry. The official ration is 2 bowls per man per day, though it shrinks in dry seasons, or when a supply cart is delayed, or when the barrels spring new leaks. On bad days, you catch yourself eyeing the storm clouds with desperate hope, praying for rain even as you dread the mud and leaks it will bring. The wall's builders, it is said, sometimes sacrificed an ox or a chicken at the start of each season to please the river gods. You wonder if a pinch of dried fish or the bones from last night's stew might serve as a suitable modern offering. When water does arrive, by rain or supply cart or luck, it is stored in whatever vessel comes to hand. Barrels, jars, cracked bowls, even the hollowed stump of a long dead tree. You guard your share with the same vigilance you reserve for your spear. Woe to the man caught stealing another's ration. More than one fight has started with nothing more than an empty bucket and a suspicious puddle on the ground. Washing is a luxury. You learn to ration not just your drinking water, but every drop you use to clean your hands, your face, your meager strip of cloth. Some guards go weeks without a proper wash, their skin marked by grime and the permanent shadow of sweat. The officers claim it is good for discipline, or character, or health. You suspect it is simply easier than admitting defeat. The wall itself suffers too. Rainwater is supposed to drain through carefully cut holes at the base of each parapet. Most are blocked by moss or the careless packing of straw. In storms, water pools on the walkway, seeping into every crack, softening the mortar, freezing in winter and prying the stones apart with the slow certainty of fate. You have spent whole days shoveling slush, patching leaks, cursing the unseen engineers whose plans never reached this far north. Sometimes the need for water makes men foolish. There are tales, half legend, half warning, of guards who tried to dig wells within the wall itself, hoping to strike a hidden spring. More often than not, they found only more stone, or at best, a trickle of water that tasted of old bones and rust. One unlucky soul, desperate beyond caution, once drank directly from a stagnant pond below the wall. He was sick for a week and lost half his hair. Now, even new recruits know better, though desperation can erode wisdom faster than rainwater erodes mortar. You look forward to the days when the stream runs high and clear, when the barrels are full, and the prospect of thirst recedes, if only for a while. On those mornings, you linger over your ration, savoring each gulp, letting it cool the back of your throat. For a brief moment, you almost feel human again. But the wall remembers every drought, every storm, every broken promise of water. The stains on the stone mark the years, the cracks mark the seasons. When you sleep, you sometimes dream of rivers, wide, endless, clean, and wake with your tongue dry as dust. You carry your empty pail back up the slope, shoulders aching, boots muddy, thirst already stirring again at the thought of another long day on the wall. You have learned to endure much, but thirst is a lesson you never quite master. For all the wall's reputation as a bulwark against outside threats, the true battles are almost always fought within. The enemy is not always a shadow on the horizon or a legend from the north, but the man who shares your barracks, the comrade who stands beside you in the cold, the friend who suddenly becomes a rival when food or comfort is scarce. The wall may be built of stone, but its heart is human, and humans quarrel as naturally as they breathe. At first, these conflicts seem petty, squabbles over a misplaced bowl, a blanket borrowed and not returned, boots left in the wrong place. You watch as tempers flare in the cramped quarters, voices raised not in anger, but in frustration. There is nowhere to escape. The barracks offer no privacy, and the endless routine grinds away at patience until even the smallest offense feels monumental. Food is a frequent catalyst. One morning, a strip of dried meat goes missing. Accusations fly, thinly disguised as jokes, but the suspicion lingers. Eyes narrow, backs turn. In a place where every meal is measured, every portion matters, and hunger makes thieves of honest men, you watch as Han, the guard with the quickest temper and the slowest smile, corners another man by the fire, demanding answers. There are shoves, muttered threats, and the unmistakable sound of knuckles meeting flesh. The sergeant intervenes, but only after the fight has run its course. Later, the missing meat turns up under someone's bunk, gnawed by rats. The apology is as thin as the soup. There are more serious arguments, too, sparked by debts, from forbidden games of dice or the careless spill of words overheard by the wrong ears. A careless insult about a man's family, a poorly timed joke about an officer, these are never forgotten. Grudges bloom in the slow soil of resentment. You learn to measure your words carefully, to weigh every gesture, to nod at the right times, and say nothing when silence is safest. Occasionally, these tensions explode. One evening, just after the last drum of the watch, a dispute over a borrowed cloak becomes a full blown brawl. Fists fly, blood is spilled, and in the chaos, a lantern is kicked over. The fire is quickly stamped out, but the smell of singed straw lingers for days. The captain makes an example of the offenders. Extra patrols, reduced rations, public shame. The message is clear. Disorder is a greater threat to the wall than any enemy from beyond. Yet even in punishment, the cracks show. The men grumble, share stories of injustices past, and nurse their grievances in private. There are whispered alliances, quiet pacts, and silent reconciliations. You see it in the way Li and Han avoid each other for a week, then share a drink one evening as if nothing happened. On the wall, memory is short when survival demands it, but resentment, like damp, always finds a way back in. Conflicts with the officers are rarer, but more dangerous. An order given in haste, a punishment handed down too harshly, these can fester. Some men dream of revenge, most settle for quiet defiance. A task done badly, a report left unfinished, a boot hidden at inspection. You have heard tales of guards who simply vanished after crossing the wrong officer, their names quietly erased from the tablets, their bunks quickly filled. There are times, too, when tension runs so high that the only release is laughter. Someone tells a joke at the captain's expense, and for a moment, the entire barracks is united in the guilty pleasure of mockery. But laughter is risky. If the wrong ears hear, there are consequences. Still, you risk it. Even the wall, with all its stern silence, cannot quite smother the sound of men remembering they are still alive. You come to recognize the signs of brewing conflict, a sudden hush when a certain man enters, the tight set of a jaw, the way men drift into cliques, sharing food and secrets. You learn to navigate these shifting alliances with the skill of a courtier, never too close, never too far, always aware that today's friend may be tomorrow's enemy. But for all the quarrels, there are moments when the wall's demands forge unlikely bonds. Two men who fought over a stolen ration may, hours later, share a lookout in the biting wind, huddled together against the cold. The wall tests everyone, and sometimes the only comfort is knowing that the man beside you is suffering just as much. You suspect that in the end, these small battles matter more than the great ones sung by poets. The wall may stand for centuries, but its true history is written in bruises, broken knuckles, and the uneasy truces made at midnight. As you watch another argument smolder into silence, you wonder if the wall could stand at all if men ever truly learned to live together. But then you think it would not be the wall, it would not be the empire, and it would not be you. Sometimes the monotony of the wall is broken by a visit to the nearby village. The officers call these excursions liaison with the locals, as if diplomacy is a matter of exchanging pleasantries and taking careful notes. In reality, it is a grim barter, the empire's thin coin and thinner promises for whatever the villagers can spare. For the guards, it is a rare change of scenery, a reminder that there is a world beyond stone and regulations, even if that world is only a scattering of huts with sagging roofs and hungry eyes. Your orders are simple: travel with 2 companions to the village, collect the monthly levy of grain, and maintain good relations. The last instruction is always underlined, as if a stern face and a muddy uniform could inspire loyalty in people who have seen nothing from the wall but a constant drain on their resources. You pull your cloak tight against the morning chill, sling your spear over your shoulder, and march through the narrow path that winds between fields where nothing grows straight. The village appears with the weary inevitability of old debt. Mud walls, broken fences, the sharp smell of wood smoke and pig dung. Chickens scatter before your boots. Children, barefoot and wild haired, watch you with silent suspicion from behind doorways. An old woman sits at the threshold of her hut, her face a map of the same weather that cracks the wall's mortar. She does not bother to greet you. She has seen too many soldiers, too many years. You find the headman by the well, arguing with a neighbor over a leaky bucket. He straightens when he sees your uniforms, wipes his hands on his robe, and forces a smile that does not reach his eyes. "Welcome, honored protectors of the realm," he says, the words as hollow as a dry cistern. He gestures to a pile of sacks, grain, millet, a few shriveled turnips. You count the bags, pretending not to notice how light they are, or the way the villagers avert their gaze. The records will show the correct numbers. The empire likes its ledgers neat, even if the truth is threadbare. There are formalities, a stamped document, a quick inspection of the goods, the ritual exchange of polite lies. The headman assures you that the harvest was plentiful, that the people are grateful for your protection, that all is well. You nod, careful not to contradict him, careful not to offer pity. Pity is another kind of insult, one the villagers cannot afford and the guards cannot risk. Sometimes, if the officer is in a generous mood, he allows the guards to mingle. You take the opportunity to walk through the village, feigning interest in the state of the fences or the quality of the water. In truth, you are searching for a face that looks like home, or at least less like the wall. The villagers, in turn, study you with a mixture of fear and envy. For all your hardship, you are still a servant of the empire, still the arm that collects their due. To them, you are both neighbor and threat, and never quite human. Once, a child offers you a dried apple, eyes wide with hope or mischief. You take it, thank her, and watch her vanish into the shadow of a hut. The apple is small and tart, but for a moment it tastes of something other than duty. You remember your own village, now distant as a story half heard in a dream. There are unspoken bargains. A farmer slips you a handful of beans in exchange for a whispered promise that his son will not be conscripted at the next levy. You know you cannot keep the promise, but you take the beans. Later, you give them to Lee, who claims he once saw a man survive a whole winter on nothing but beans and stubbornness. Not every visit is so peaceful. Sometimes tempers flare, a guard insults a villager, a debt is recalled, old resentments surface. The officers step in quickly, smoothing things over with threats or bribes, but the damage lingers. The wall is not the only thing that keeps people apart. When the sun is high, you prepare to return, sacks loaded, papers signed. The villagers watch you go, silent and expressionless. You catch the old woman's gaze. She does not look away, and in her eyes you see a question you cannot answer. Who suffers more, the ones behind the wall or the ones it claims to protect? On the walk back, your companions talk idly about the village, the food, the women, the hopelessness of it all. You listen without replying, thinking of the line that divides soldier and peasant, wall and field, hunger and authority. It is not a line you can see, but you feel it in every step. Back at the garrison, the officers record the delivery in their ledgers. The day passes into memory, and the wall closes around you once more. The village recedes, just another place that owes the empire, just another reminder that misery is as common as dust. You go to sleep that night with the taste of dried apple still lingering in your mouth, uncertain whether it is a blessing or a warning. For all its boasts of keeping out the chaos beyond, the wall is not a barrier to everything. Nature is indifferent to the ambitions of men. Wild animals come and go as they please, slipping through cracks, prowling beneath the shadow of the stones, reminding you that, for all your vigilance, the world is still wilder than any law can tame. Most nights, the noises begin just as darkness settles. You lie in your bunk, counting heartbeats, when a faint scratching comes from the corner. Rats, large, gray, and brazen, rule the underworld of the barracks. You have seen them steal crumbs from beneath the cook's nose, slip through the tiniest gap, and vanish with a strip of dried meat clutched between their teeth. Once, a rat ran across your chest while you slept, waking you with a start. Lee claims he caught one the size of a cat. You suspect he is exaggerating, but only a little. Rats are only the beginning. Mice, too, are common, darting through supplies and leaving their tiny droppings everywhere. Snakes find their way in during the warmer months, drawn by the easy prey and the warmth of the kitchen fires. You remember one morning when a young guard leapt a full pace in the air, shrieking, after discovering a coiled viper beneath his bedroll. The captain, summoned by the commotion, merely laughed and told the men to be grateful. It is a sign, he insisted, that the wall is alive. You are not so sure this is a comfort. In the quiet stretches between towers, You sometimes spot foxes, red or silver in the dawn, picking their way across the stones in search of scraps. They are clever, wary, impossible to catch. Some guards claim that seeing a fox at dawn is good luck, but most only grumble about the missing chickens and the teeth marks left in the grain sacks. Birds nest in the eaves of the towers, building their homes from stolen straw and bits of discarded cloth. Swallows, sparrows, and occasionally hawks. Their droppings cover the stones, and their calls fill the air at first light, a living reminder that some creatures thrive on what men abandon. The officers, ever practical, encourage the men to collect the eggs for breakfast. You have eaten your share, the taste always tinged with guilt. Farther out, in the scrub and low forests beyond the wall, there are rumors of wolves. Some nights, when the moon is bright, you hear their howls, lonely and long, echoing through the hills. The old guards warn against leaving the safety of the wall after dark. More than one patrol has found paw prints in the mud, too large to ignore, and bones stripped clean not far from the garrison. There are stories, half believed, of wolves that watch the guards with yellow eyes, clever as men, biding their time. Deer sometimes wander near the wall, delicate and skittish, vanishing at the first sound. In winter, their tracks cross the snow, a faint lifeline of motion in a world stilled by cold. A lucky archer might bring one down, earning a feast and a rare moment of celebration, but more often they are content just to watch, envying the animal's freedom. But not every encounter is with fur or feather. Occasionally, a stranger appears, an escaped prisoner, a wandering monk, a desperate trader with contraband hidden in his sleeves. You are trained to treat every outsider as a potential threat, but in truth, most are only looking for a way past the stones or a bit of warmth and food. There is a ritual to these meetings: questions, suspicion, the slow weighing of motives. The officers insist on full reports, but everyone knows that sometimes a bribe changes hands, or a story is softened to spare trouble. The strangest encounter you remember came one misty morning when you stumbled upon a boy, no more than 10, climbing the lower stones, clutching a sack of wild herbs. He froze at the sight of your spear, but you only waved him on, too tired to care about imperial edicts. Later, you wondered what he was running from, and where he was going, and if the wall meant anything to him at all. The wall collects these moments as it collects dust: rats in the larder, snakes in the bedding, foxes at dawn, wolves howling beyond the firelight, strangers with hungry eyes, and wild stories. In the official records, none of this is mentioned. There are only patrols, numbers, and neat summaries of all quiet or minor disturbance. You keep your own mental tally: 3 snakes, too many rats to count, 5 foxes, 2 sightings of wolves, 1 escaped convict, and that silent, watchful boy. These are the creatures that slip through the cracks in the Empire's grand design. In the end, It is not the enemies from the north that unsettle you, but the world that persists beyond the reach of walls. For every day you hold your post, for every rule you follow, nature reminds you that true order is a fragile thing. The wall endures, but the wild always finds a way. If the wall itself is an unbroken line of stubborn ambition, the auxiliary buildings scattered along its length are monuments to decay and improvisation. They were designed, according to the faded records, to support the garrison in every necessity, storage, shelter, and supply. In reality, they are relics, leaning, leaking, and forever in need of repair, much like the men who occupy them. The storerooms are the first you notice, low, windowless, built from the same stone as the wall, but with far less care. Their doors sag on rusted hinges. The locks are a patchwork of mismatched iron and rope. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of mold, mouse droppings, and the faint memory of grain. Barrels line the walls, some cracked and empty, others filled with an unidentifiable mash that might once have been beans or millet. On rainy days, the water pools in the corners, soaking sacks until even the rats refuse a second nibble. The armory is grander in theory than in practice. A battered sign proclaims its purpose, but the reality is a single cramped room where spears are stacked like firewood, their shafts warped from damp, their bronze tips dull with corrosion. The bows hang from pegs, their strings fraying, their curves warped by years of humidity. A chest of arrows stands in one corner, but most are crooked or missing feathers, their tips replaced by whatever scrap metal could be hammered into shape. When the captain inspects the armory, he does so with the resigned expression of a man searching for hope at the bottom of an empty jar. Next to the armory, a shed serves as the kitchen, if kitchen is not too generous a word. A smoke blackened hole in the roof allows some of the fumes to escape, but the rest lingers, turning every meal into a lesson in resilience. The cook rules his domain with an iron ladle and the kind of authority that only hunger grants. The shelves sag beneath chipped bowls, battered pots, and a jumble of wooden spoons, most with tooth marks in the handles. On feast days, a cauldron of gruel simmers over the fire. On other days, the only thing cooking is the cook's temper. Nearby, the latrines squat in a muddy pit, shielded by a lattice of reeds that provide privacy in name only. The smell is legendary, especially in summer, when the sun bakes every indignity into the earth. You take care to visit quickly and at odd hours, praying you will not meet a comrade inside. Sometimes the officers announce a cleaning rotation, a punishment disguised as public duty. Men emerge from these sessions cursing the ancestors of every architect in the empire. There are sheds for firewood, never quite full, and barns for animals that are almost always empty. Once you glimpsed a half-starved mule tethered by the door, its ribs sharp beneath patchy fur. It was gone the next day, either eaten or traded for something less disappointing. Some outbuildings are little more than piles of collapsed timber, their purpose lost to time. The men use them for storage, shelter from the wind, or as secret meeting spots when gambling is strictly forbidden. The towers themselves are part of this strange economy of space. The lower rooms serve as impromptu storehouses filled with sacks, tools, and the occasional hoard of contraband wine. There are corners so dark and damp that mushrooms grow on the walls, inedible but impressive in their stubbornness. In the coldest months, the men huddle in these rooms, sharing body heat and bitter jokes, listening to the wind howl outside. No inventory is ever truly accurate. The officers record what they are told, the sergeants hide what they can, and the soldiers make do with what is left. Sometimes, an enterprising guard discovers a forgotten cache, an extra blanket, a jar of dried fruit, a bottle of sour wine, and becomes a hero for an evening. More often, he finds nothing but dust and disappointment. The auxiliary buildings are a lesson in impermanence. The Empire built them to last a lifetime, but lifetimes are shorter here, and memory is shorter still. Each repair is temporary, each improvement a gamble against weather and time. The only thing that endures is the wall itself, and even that is mostly because it is too heavy to move. You walk the perimeter, checking doors, counting barrels, jotting numbers in a ledger that no one will ever read. Behind you, the wind whistles through broken shutters and rattles loose boards. In the silence, you wonder how many generations have patched these roofs, replaced these locks, cursed these walls. You wonder if, centuries from now, some other guard will find your own handwriting beneath a pile of cracked tiles and laugh. On the wall, nothing is permanent, not even the buildings meant to outlast you all. If there is one thing more unyielding than the wall itself, it is the bureaucracy that winds through every stone and shadow. Orders arrive on a regular schedule, sometimes more regular than the rations, certainly more regular than relief. They come by runner or mounted courier, wrapped in oilcloth against the rain, sealed with the official stamp of an officer you will never meet. Every new scroll is a promise and a threat. Things will change. Things must never change. This morning, the runner is a boy, thin and out of breath, who hands the scroll to your captain as if presenting a sacred relic. The captain breaks the seal, unrolls the parchment, and reads in silence, his lips pursed. The rest of you watch from a distance, pretending not to care, while quietly hoping the new orders bring a shift in routine, a lighter duty, or, miracle of miracles, a holiday. They never do. The orders are read aloud at midday, assembled in the yard with the ceremonial gravity of a royal decree. The captain's voice is as dry as last year's millet, the words as familiar as the pattern of cracks in your boots. Patrol routes are to be adjusted in accordance with seasonal intelligence. The grain rations will be reviewed pending delivery from the southern districts. A new system of record keeping will be implemented, with ledgers replaced by thinner, less practical notebooks that will inevitably disappear by the next season. The men listen in silence, faces expressionless. You have learned to hear what is not said. There will be more work, not less, more paperwork, more forms to fill, more signatures to forge when someone's hand cramps or a tally goes missing. The wall has always been less about keeping enemies out and more about keeping accounts in order. Bureaucracy is the true master here. Each command arrives shrouded in ambiguity, open to interpretation and debate. The officers bicker in low voices over the meaning of enhanced vigilance and whether it requires twice daily inspections or merely a new sign on the gate. You have seen orders countermanded within a week, new forms printed to replace the old, only to find the old ones quietly reinstated by men who have run out of patience with change. Sometimes the orders are absurd. Last spring, a scroll arrived decreeing that all sentries must wear their helmets at all times, even in the latrines. For 3 days, the barracks was filled with the sound of tin scraping on stone, punctuated by curses and the occasional helmet falling into the pit. Eventually, the rule was rescinded, but not before everyone had learned a valuable lesson. Orders are fleeting, but embarrassment is forever. Other times, the orders are cruel. A cut in rations, a call for extra patrols in the dead of winter, a demand for volunteers to repair a collapsed section of wall. You do not volunteer, but your name appears on the list anyway, written in a hand suspiciously similar to your own. There is paperwork for everything: patrols completed, breaches reported, supplies inventoried, punishments meted out. The ledgers multiply in the captain's quarters, filling shelves and boxes, then spilling into storage rooms, and eventually being burned for warmth when winter grows too harsh. No one is ever sure what happens to the finished scrolls. Some say they are sent to the capital. Others believe they are read only by mice and mold. Sometimes a scribe arrives from the nearest town, sleeves stained with ink, fingers permanently smudged. He asks questions, writes your answers in a cramped hand, and reminds you to sign your name at the bottom, even if you cannot read the question. You have learned that a shaky signature is safer than an honest answer. Once, a friend refused to sign. He spent a week digging ditches in silence, watched closely by a bored officer with nothing better to do. Amid all this, you find yourself missing the days when your only duty was to watch the horizon. Now you watch the progress of paperwork, the shuffle of scrolls, the slow crawl of one ink across a page. The wall remains unmoved, but the bureaucracy moves through you all, wearing you down more efficiently than any invading army. Sometimes you dream of orders arriving that say, "Go home." But the empire's bureaucracy is eternal, and the only things that ever go home are the scrolls themselves, sent back to dust and darkness, carrying your name and your deeds, whether true or not. By evening, the new orders are already smudged and stained, tucked into ledgers that will outlast your memory of them. You scratch your name one more time, close the book, and wonder how many more signatures it will take before the wall remembers you. Even the ending of a shift on the wall has its rituals, formalities that must be observed, as precise and pointless as any you have performed throughout the long day. It does not matter whether the hours passed in tense boredom, bone deep fatigue, or the rare adrenaline of an actual alarm. When your time is up, you do not simply hand your spear to the next man and return to the barracks. No, the Empire demands ceremony, and the wall enforces it with all the weight of tradition. It begins with the bell, a hollow, uneven clang that drifts along the battlements. You feel it in your bones before you hear it, as if your body knows the hour even before the sound arrives. You move to your post, standing as straight as your aching back will allow, spear held upright, helmet just so, eyes fixed somewhere between the horizon and the cracks in the mortar. The new watch lines up opposite you, faces grim or vacant, or, on the best days, still half asleep. The officer on duty steps forward, roll in hand, voice clipped and official. State your name and post, he says, as though he has not seen you every day for the last 6 months. You respond, tone flat with exhaustion and the bitter comfort of routine. He glances at his scroll, makes a show of checking the tablet, and nods. The forms are always filled out, signatures always scrawled at the bottom, sometimes before the sun has even set. Next comes the inspection. The outgoing guard presents his weapons, one by one: the spear, the battered shield, the whistle for raising alarms, the half empty pouch of arrows. The officer looks them over with a studied frown, searching for evidence of misuse, or, more likely, any excuse to note a deficiency in the logbook. You stand still as he lifts your helmet, checks the inside for dirt, inspects the soles of your boots for stones or mud. Once, a friend was penalized for a speck of dried blood on his knife, though whether it came from an enemy or a badly sliced radish, no one could say. After the inspection, you and your relief exchange a silent nod, a gesture that contains both resignation and fleeting camaraderie. Sometimes, in that moment, you catch a flash of understanding in the other's eyes. The day is done, for better or worse, and another has taken up your burden. You hand over your post with all the gravity of a magistrate passing a sentence, then step aside, resisting the urge to break into a run toward the barracks. But even as you leave, there is still the paperwork. You are required to enter your observations in the shift ledger using the proper forms and the official ink. Nothing to report, you write, or weather foul, no incident, or, on particularly honest days, boredom near fatal, minor altercation with rats. The officer reviews your report, adds a note or two of his own, and stamps it with the seal of the wall. The ledgers will pile up in the storeroom, unread and unloved, but woe to the man who leaves a blank space. The ritual ends in the yard, where the relieved guards gather for a final accounting. Equipment is counted, ranks are dismissed, and a few words of encouragement are dispensed by the captain, who never seems to tire of reminding you that the wall stands only because men like you do. You mumble your assent, already planning the route to your bed, or, if luck is with you, to the secret stash of wine hidden behind the barracks. Inside, you peel off your armor, feeling the bruises where the straps have rubbed, the itch of sweat dried into your shirt, the dull ache in your legs from hours spent standing watch. The others do the same, some in silence, some with the half-hearted jokes that pass for conversation when fatigue has eaten through even your sense of irony. There is comfort in these familiar movements, in the routine of disarming and undressing, as if by shedding your uniform, you can also shed the day's weight. Sometimes, the end of a shift brings a rare sense of triumph, survival, if nothing else. More often, it is simply relief, a quiet exhale, a sense of time restarting after hours spent suspended in the duties of the wall. You eat, you drink, you try to sleep, knowing tomorrow will be another round of the same ceremonies, the same inspections, the same signatures in the same ledgers. Outside, the new watch takes up its post, the bell fades, and the wall slips into another night of vigilance. You watch the light die in the yard, listen to the quiet shuffle of boots on stone, and wonder how many times this ritual has played out, how many more times it will repeat before anyone notices it is no longer necessary. You close your eyes, the words of the officer echoing in your mind. The wall endures because we endure. You are not sure if it is a blessing or a curse. The end of your shift is a ceremony that means nothing and somehow everything. At the end of your shift, after the paperwork is done and the last murmurs of conversation have faded into snores, you find yourself standing atop the wall, alone beneath the pale, indifferent stars. The wind moves along the stones in slow, mournful waves. Below, the land stretches out in shadow, the same jagged hills, the same battered fields, the same distant villages that were here when you arrived, and that will remain when you are long gone. You lean on your spear, feeling the rough, familiar texture of the stones beneath your palms, and try to imagine how many others have stood exactly where you are standing. How many feet have worn these stones smooth? How many hands have traced these cracks, watching the same slow drift of clouds? You think of all the men whose names are lost, laborers, soldiers, officers, rebels, each a tiny thread in the tapestry of the wall, each swept away by time like dust off the battlements. The wall is eternal, they say. It outlasts kings and dynasties, ambitions and memories. You have come to believe this is less a boast and more a kind of curse. The stones endure not out of pride, but out of inertia, a mass too vast to move, too dense to break. You imagine the wall, 1,000 years from now, still sprawling across the ridges, wind scoured, grass choked, and indifferent. Maybe a handful of tourists will shuffle along what remains, guided by stories that have no connection to the men who once shivered here. The empire builds monuments to its own persistence, and yet you cannot help but feel the weight of futility in every stone. The threats the wall was meant to hold back are ever changing. First bandits, then armies, then memories of both. You realize that, like the men who built it, the wall is mostly good at holding itself together, not at holding anything out. Sometimes you wonder if the only thing the wall truly contains is the memory of suffering, a vast ledger of forgotten hardships stacked higher than the bricks themselves. You look out over the horizon, watching the faint flicker of a village lantern, and wonder who suffers more, the ones locked outside the wall or those inside, condemned to guard it forever. You think of the villagers, the officers, your comrades. You think of the endless cycle of patrols and paperwork, of nights broken by cold and rats and stories whispered in the dark. You think of Lee and Han and all the others who have become both family and strangers. You wonder which will fade first, the bonds between you or the memory of why you came here at all. Sometimes you try to imagine life beyond the wall as it might have been if you had never donned this uniform. You imagine green fields and familiar faces, the laughter of children, the warmth of a real home. But the images are thin, worn smooth by distance and repetition. The wall has a way of erasing the future as surely as it erases the past, leaving you stranded in a perpetual present, marked only by the changing of the guards and the slow crumbling of mortar. You have learned to find a strange comfort in this futility. There is a kind of freedom in knowing that your struggles will not echo in the annals of history, that your name will not be carved into the stones. Your legacy is the quiet endurance of ordinary men, the way you pass the time, the way you mark the days, sometimes with a notch on your spear, sometimes with a joke whispered under your breath, sometimes with nothing more than a long, patient sigh. Before you leave your post, you kneel and pick up a small, smooth stone from between the cracks. It is nothing special, just another fragment of the world, but you press it into your palm, the cool weight grounding you. Maybe someone will find it centuries from now. Maybe they will wonder about the man who held it and imagine for a moment that the wall was built not just by emperors and generals, but by men who knew exhaustion, hunger, and hope in equal measure. You turn and begin the slow walk back to the barracks. The wind follows you, carrying the faintest scent of rain, or perhaps only the memory of rain. Behind you, the wall disappears into darkness, a line drawn by stubbornness across the bones of the earth. The empire will forget you, the wall will outlast you, and eternity will go on without noticing your passing. You are a sentry in a line that never ends, a small heartbeat in the silence between stones. But for tonight, you have done your part. The wall endures. And so, for now, do you.